Okay, let's say I offered you an investment that has a 99% chance of returning a profit. Would you accept it? Yes? No? Or you need more information? Now, if you're a smart investor, the answer is you need more information. What happens if you win? What happens if you lose? Let's say you need to wager $1 million and 99% chance you win $1, but 1% chance that you lose your entire $1 million. That's a terrible investment. No one should ever invest in anything like that. But if we make the upside a little bit more reasonable, let's say 99% chance that the upside return is 20%. So if you put in $1 million, you would profit $200,000. How about now? Yes, no, or need more information? And this one's a lot more tempting. But I didn't tell you what happens in the downside. Let's say in the 1% chance, not only you lose your $1 million, but you need to shell out an extra $100 million from your account. I'm not talking like you have that kind of cash in your account. Neither do I. The point being, you need to have, a very good idea of what's going to happen in the downside in order to know whether or not an investment is good. Now let's be even more reasonable. Let's say the upside is still 20% with a 99% chance, and then the downside is 20% with a 1% chance. So if it goes up, it goes to 1.2 million. If it goes down, it goes to 800,000. But the 1.2 million is much, much more likely than the 800,000. Would you take this investment? Now, this is extremely tempting. Most people would say yes. But the answer is you need more information. Because I didn't tell you the time horizon over which this investment will realize this type of return. What if it takes 10 years? So the average return, or the expected return, is $196,000 if you work it out, which is an expected return of 19.6%, which that's pretty good in some perspectives. But if that takes 10 years, 19.6% over 10 years is really 1.8% annualized. That'd be called the internal rate of return, which in many cases, including this day and age, that's below the risk-free rate. And I can even go beyond that, which if I guaranteed that it went up to $1.2 million, that is still below the risk-free rate of 3%. So you need to ask a lot of questions before you even think about putting your money anywhere, right? Now let me ask a totally different question. Let's say there's a 1% chance of an upside and a 99% chance of a loss. Would you take this investment? Yes, no, or need more information? If you've been paying attention closely, you should know what's going on here. You need more information. Let's say in the 1% upside chance, $1 turns into $1 million, and in the downside chance, $1 goes down to $0. In that case, sure, it's pretty volatile, but the expected returns are massive. So it would make sense, depending on your investment risk appetite, to put in a small portion of your portfolio into an investment like that, because it's quite risky, but also very high expected returns. That's generally the trade-off that people encounter. But more generally, this highlights a misconception that some people have about, for example, casinos. There can be a game that a casino sets up that it loses 99% of the time, but still expects to make a profit on it. Because let's say if the bettor wins, they give you only a small little slice of the pie, but if you lose everything. So in expectation, the house is going to make money off of that. On the other hand, there can be a game that the house wins 99% of the time and still expects to lose money off of it if in the 1% of the time they give too much money to the bettor. And this highlights this misconception people have where probability of winning or losing, a lot of people think that has something to do with whether or not something's profitable or a good investment or a good bet or whatever. That is not a criterion you should use to determine whether something's a good investment. And we can go even beyond this into the realm of sports betting, for example. If someone tells you, I mean, there are podcasts that have their picks for who they think is going to win a sporting event. If they say, pick this team because I think they're going to win, therefore this is a good investment, I need you to run away from that person as quickly as possible. Because whether or not a team is likely to win has nothing to do with whether or not buying a contract of them winning is a good idea. Let's say there's a 90% chance, let's assume this probability really exists. There's a 90% chance that Team A is going to win, but the implied probability in the prediction market is 95%. That means it's overpriced. So if you buy that contract, in expectation, you are going to lose money, even though there's a 90% chance of them winning. It's all about the price. What happens if it wins? What happens if it loses? And how do you average that over the likelihood of each event happening? You cannot just look at the probability of being right or the probability of being wrong. Now, why am I yapping about all of this? I think this concept highlights a misconception that many people have about life in general. How do you make decisions? People think, is there a high chance that this choice or this career path will result in a positive outcome in my life? They use this likelihood idea. But as I've clarified several times, you need to look not just at probabilities, but what happens under that event. What's the magnitude of good? What's the magnitude of bad? I think the question people should be asking to make the correct decision in life is, what decision maximizes the total expected positive emotion throughout my life, subject to the constraint of how much pain or negative emotion I'm willing to endure? The greater your bandwidth for negative emotion, essentially the more options you have for what paths to take in life in order to maximize the amount of positive emotion you have. Now, of course, this question doesn't have some clear-cut, tractable, unique, optimal answer, but it can provide a framework to reject certain decisions by saying, okay, this certainly does not satisfy how I would classify this optimization problem in my head. I feel that people do not operate under this framework whatsoever when they're making decisions in their life. I think a lot of people, especially these days, do what they want to do whenever they're not forced to do something else by whatever circumstances, just moment to moment. And this really characterizes hedonism. In hedonism, the time horizon for optimizing positive emotion is not a lifetime. It's whatever little moment or window into the future that they're thinking about in that moment. And consequently, there's a big deprioritization of thinking about what are the negative ramifications in a long-term sense. Because in a short-term sense, there's no need to consider negative ramifications if it's just pure hedonic bliss, which I really think that's an unfortunate framework that a lot of people use to make decisions. So I just think it's best to be aware of these long-term outcomes. And when you're making decisions, don't just think about what's likely to happen, good versus bad. You need to think about the magnitude of the goodness or badness that comes from your decisions. And I think that's a much more principled approach to navigating your way throughout life.